My son said it so casually, like he was asking for a cup of tea. "Mom, I need $200,000. He told me over the phone. You're too old to enjoy it anyway. What are you even saving it for?" I remember staring at the wall, at the faded photo of his father and me on our wedding day. His father had worked double shifts for years. I'd clipped coupons, skipped vacations, worn the same coat for a decade. Every sacrifice had a name, and that name was my son. I asked him what he needed the money for. "A business opportunity," he said quickly. Too quickly. "Look, it's basically my inheritance. I'm just asking for it early." I told him I needed time to think. He sighed loudly. "Don't take forever. I already told Claire we'd have it by next month." That was the moment something cracked inside me. Not shattered, just cracked enough to let the truth seep in. This wasn't need. This wasn't desperation. This was entitlement. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't remind him of the nights I stayed up sewing his school costumes or the years I paid his rent after college. I simply said, "All right, I'll handle things." The next morning, I made an appointment with my lawyer. I'd written my will years ago after his father passed. Everything went to my son. The house, the savings, the investments. I never imagined I'd change it. Why would I? He was my only child. But sitting in that quiet office, I heard his words again. "You're too old to enjoy it anyway." So I changed my will, not out of spite, out of clarity. I set up a trust instead. The money would be released only under certain conditions: stable employment, no outstanding debt from gambling or high-risk investments, and most important, basic respect and involvement in my life. Regular visits, real contact, not just calls when money was needed. I also added something else. If he contested the will or tried to pressure me financially, his share would be redirected to charities I cared about: children's education, widows' support, community clinics. When I walked out of the lawyer's office, I felt strangely light, calm, like I'd finally stood up straight after years of bending. I didn't tell my son right away. A week later, he called again, irritated. "So, did you move the money?" "No," I said. There was a pause. Then his voice hardened. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean, I won't be giving you $200,000. He laughed, sharp and humorless. "You can't be serious." "I am." He exploded. He accused me of being selfish, manipulative, dramatic. He said I was choosing money over my own child. Then he delivered the line that sealed everything. "If you don't give me what's mine, don't expect me to be around." So he wasn't. Weeks passed, no calls, no visits, not even a text on my birthday. At first the silence hurt, I won't lie. I'd pick up my phone and put it down again. I'd cook too much food, then remember there was no one coming over. Nights were the hardest. But something unexpected happened. I started living. I joined a local walking group. I took a painting class I'd always postponed. I reconnected with an old friend who made me laugh until my ribs hurt. I volunteered twice a week at a literacy center, helping women my age learn to read and write for the first time. For the first time in years, my days weren't filled with waiting. 3 months later, my doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole and felt my stomach drop. It was my son and Claire. They looked different, tired, smaller somehow. I opened the door but didn't step aside. "Mom," he said, forcing a smile. "Can we talk?" Claire avoided my eyes. We sat in the living room, the same couch he'd sprawled on as a teenager, demanding snacks. He cleared his throat. "So things didn't work out," he began. "The business opportunity. A failed crypto scheme. The money he had scraped together, mostly loans, was gone. Creditors were calling. Claire's parents had cut them off after discovering the truth." He swallowed hard. "We need help." I said nothing. Claire finally spoke, her voice shaking. "We're sorry. We didn't mean what we said. We were stressed." My son leaned forward. "Mom, please, just loan us the money. Or at least change the will back. We'll do better. I promise." I looked at him, really looked. The boy I raised was still in there somewhere, buried under arrogance and bad decisions. But I wasn't angry. I was done enabling. "I already changed my will," I said calmly. His face went pale. "What?" I explained. "The trust, the conditions, the charities. You gave my money away." He snapped. "No," I corrected gently. "I protected it and myself." He stood up, pacing. "This is insane. After everything, you're punishing me." "I'm not punishing you," I said. "Some setting boundaries. Something I should have done years ago." Silence filled the room. Then something unexpected happened. He sat back down. His shoulders slumped. His voice cracked. "I didn't think you'd actually stand up to me," he whispered. "I thought you'd always be there to fix things." "I am here," I said. "Just not as an ATM." Tears filled his eyes. Real ones this time. "I'm scared," he admitted. I messed up. That was the first honest thing he'd said in a long time. I didn't give him money that day. I offered something else. Help finding a financial counselor, a place to stay temporarily with clear rules, weekly dinners, therapy, work. It wasn't what he came for, but it was what he needed. He hesitated, then nodded. 3 months ago, he'd walked away because I wouldn't give him money. Now, he was asking for something far more valuable, a chance to earn back trust. And this time, I was finally wise enough to say yes, on my terms. She had spent her entire life putting her son first, often without a second thought. From the moment he was born, every decision she made revolved around his comfort, his future, and his happiness. She worked through exhaustion, skipped small pleasures, and quietly accepted a life of constant giving because she believed that was what love meant. So when he finally said the words that shattered her illusion, demanding $200,000 and dismissing her with, "You're too old to enjoy it anyway," the pain cut deeper than any financial worry ever could. It wasn't just the money he wanted, it was the complete disregard for her humanity, her sacrifices, and her right to dignity in the later years of her life. At first, she couldn't even respond. The sentence echoed in her mind, heavy and cruel, reducing her to nothing more than a wallet with an expiration date. In that moment, she realized how naturally entitlement had replaced gratitude in her son's heart. He wasn't asking for help. He wasn't seeking guidance. He was issuing a demand. Already convinced that everything she owned belonged to him, the woman who once held his hand as he learned to walk now felt invisible, as if her only remaining purpose was to fund his desires. What hurt most was how casually he said it. There was no hesitation, no guilt, no awareness of the decades of sacrifice behind that money. She remembered the nights she went to bed hungry so he could eat better, the overtime hours that stole years from her youth, and the dreams she postponed indefinitely because, someday, always belonged to him. That money was not just savings, it was her life, compressed into numbers on a page, and he had dismissed it and her with a single careless sentence. Something changed inside her then. It wasn't anger that rose up, but clarity. For the first time, she saw the truth without excuses or denial. Love did not mean endless surrender. Being a mother did not require self-erasure. She understood that continuing to give without limits had taught him to take without conscience. The demand wasn't the real betrayal, the belief behind it was. He truly thought she had nothing left to enjoy, no future worth protecting, no identity beyond being his safety net. That realization was devastating, but it was also freeing. She didn't argue or plead because she finally understood that words wouldn't fix what years of unchecked entitlement had built. Instead, she chose silence, calm, deliberate silence, and within that silence, she made a decision that would redefine her life. She decided that her worth would no longer be measured by what she could give away. Her time, her savings, and her remaining years mattered, and they would no longer be claimed by someone who saw her as already finished. In choosing herself for the first time, she didn't stop loving her son. She simply stopped allowing love to be confused with exploitation. The demand for money had stripped away her illusions, but it also returned something precious to her, self-respect. And from that moment on, nothing between them could ever be the same. When the money didn't arrive, the change in her son was immediate and unmistakable. At first, there were impatient calls, his voice tight with irritation as he asked what was taking so long. He spoke as if there had been a delay in a bank transfer, not a decision that affected an entire relationship. She kept her answers brief, calm, and honest, telling him she wouldn't be giving him the money. Each conversation ended more abruptly than the last, until one day the calls stopped altogether. The silence that followed was loud. Days passed without a message, then weeks. No casual check-ins, no updates about his life, no concern for her health or well-being. The absence made something painfully clear. As long as she had been useful to him financially, she had mattered. Once that role was gone, so was he. It was a realization that hurt more deeply than his original demand, because it confirmed what she had feared, but tried not to believe. She waited at first, telling herself he was busy or upset, and would come around. She set her phone face up on the table while she ate, glancing at it every few minutes. At night she kept the ringer on, just in case, but the screen stayed dark. Even on her birthday, there was nothing. No call, no text, not even a hurried message sent out of obligation. That was the moment the truth fully settled in. His affection had conditions, and money was one of them. The pain of being cut off was sharp and personal. This was the child she had rocked to sleep, the one she had defended against the world. Now, he was choosing absence as a weapon, hoping it would hurt enough to force her compliance. And it did hurt, but not in the way he expected. Instead of breaking her, the distance slowly stripped away the illusion that their relationship had been balanced or healthy. In the quiet, she began to see how often she had accepted emotional neglect in exchange for brief moments of approval. How many conversations had revolved around his needs, his plans, his problems. How rarely he had asked about her life without an agenda attached. The silence, painful as it was, became a mirror, reflecting a truth she could no longer ignore. There were moments of grief, of course. She cried in the evenings, mourning not just the loss of contact, but the loss of the son she thought she had. She wondered where she had gone wrong, replaying years of parenting choices in her mind. But alongside the grief grew something else, understanding. She realized that love should not require erasing oneself, and connection should not depend on financial compliance. As weeks turned into months, the absence lost its power. She stopped checking her phone every few minutes. She stopped imagining explanations for his behavior. The space he left behind no longer felt like a wound, it felt like room. Room to breathe, to think, to exist without being evaluated for what she could provide. Being cut off had revealed his priorities more clearly than any argument ever could. It showed her that his withdrawal was not about being hurt, it was about leverage. And once she recognized that, she refused to let it control her. His silence, meant as punishment, became confirmation that her decision had been necessary. In losing his contact, she gained clarity, and that clarity, though painful, was the beginning of her emotional freedom. Once the shock of the silence began to fade, something unexpected happened. Her days, no longer structured around waiting for a phone call or worrying about her son's moods, slowly opened up. At first, the emptiness felt uncomfortable, almost wrong, as if she were forgetting an obligation. For years, her routine had revolved around anticipating his needs, staying available just in case he called, and shaping her time around his life. Without that constant pull, she wasn't sure who she was supposed to be. The change came quietly. One morning, instead of sitting at the window with her tea, she put on her walking shoes and stepped outside. The air was cool and fresh, and the simple act of moving forward felt symbolic. She joined a small neighborhood walking group she'd noticed before, but never had the courage or permission she thought she needed to join. The conversations were light, the laughter easy, and for the first time in a long while, she felt seen not as someone's mother, but as herself. Encouraged by that small step, she began saying yes to things she had always postponed. A painting class at the community center caught her attention. She told herself she wasn't talented, that it was a waste of time, but she went anyway. The first day, her hands shook as she held the brush, but as colors spread across the canvas, something inside her loosened. Each stroke felt like a reclaiming of space she had once surrendered without question. She reconnected with people she had drifted away from over the years, old friends who remembered her laugh, her opinions, her personality beyond motherhood. They met for coffee, shared stories, and spoke about life without measuring every word. These connections reminded her that her world had always been bigger than one relationship, even if she had forgotten it for a time. Volunteering became another turning point. Twice a week, she helped at a local literacy center, sitting with women her age who were learning to read and write for the first time. Watching their determination stirred something deep in her. They weren't defined by what they lacked or by what others thought they deserved. They were building something new, letter by letter, just as she was rebuilding herself day by day. With each passing week, the ache of her son's absence softened. It didn't disappear, but it no longer controlled her. Her evenings filled with small, meaningful rituals, reading, music, quiet reflection. She slept better. She laughed more freely. She realized that joy hadn't abandoned her with age. It had simply been waiting for permission to return. What surprised her most was the sense of peace. Not the loud, triumphant kind, but a steady calm rooted in self-respect. She no longer felt guilty for enjoying her life or for protecting her boundaries. For the first time, her happiness wasn't dependent on someone else's approval. In rediscovering herself, she didn't erase the love she had for her son. That love remained steady and deep. But it no longer came at the cost of her own well-being. She had learned that independence was not abandonment, and fulfillment was not selfishness. By choosing to live fully again, she proved something powerful, to herself more than anyone else. Her life still had value, meaning, and beauty, and in reclaiming it, she found a strength she never knew she had. 3 months after the silence began. The knock at her door felt unreal, like a sound pulled from a dream she thought she'd already woken from. She hadn't been expecting anyone. When she looked through the peephole and saw her son standing there, her breath caught in her throat. He looked thinner, his shoulders slumped, the confidence he once carried worn down into something fragile. Beside him stood Claire, her hands clasped tightly together, eyes fixed on the floor. The sight alone told her this visit wasn't about reconciliation, it was about desperation. She opened the door slowly, giving herself time to steady her emotions. The house, once filled with memories of his laughter and footsteps, suddenly felt like neutral ground. They stepped inside cautiously, as if unsure whether they were welcome. No one spoke at first. The silence was different from before, heavy, strained, and filled with unspoken truths. When he finally spoke, his voice lacked the sharpness she remembered. He talked about plans that had fallen apart, investments that vanished almost overnight, and promises that turned into debts. The opportunity he had been so confident about had collapsed, taking with it his pride and any financial stability he thought he had secured. Creditors were calling. Relationships were strained. The world no longer bent around his expectations. As he spoke, she listened without interrupting. There was no satisfaction in his downfall, no sense of victory. Instead, she felt a quiet sadness, not because he had failed, but because failure was the only thing that had forced him to see reality. Claire finally looked up, her eyes rimmed with tears, apologizing in a voice barely above a whisper. They admitted they had been wrong, that their words had been careless and cruel. Then came the request. Not demanded this time, but asked. Help, money. A way out. She felt the weight of the moment settle in her chest. This was what the silence had been leading to. The power dynamic had shifted completely. 3 months ago, he believed she had nothing left to offer but cash. Now, stripped of options, he stood before her not as a confident taker, but as a man facing the consequences of his own choices. She spoke calmly, explaining the changes she had made, the boundaries she had set, and the reasons behind them. His reaction was immediate: shock, disbelief, and then anger. He accused her of abandoning him, of turning her back when he needed her most. The words stung, but they didn't sway her. She recognized them now for what they were: fear speaking through frustration. As the conversation continued, something shifted. His anger cracked, revealing something raw underneath. He admitted he hadn't expected her to stand firm. He had assumed she would always rescue him, always soften, always give in. That assumption, now proven false, left him exposed and uncertain. In that moment, she understood the true meaning of strength. It wasn't in withholding love, but in refusing to enable destruction. His return wasn't a victory for her. It was a test of whether she would abandon herself again. And this time, she didn't. She offered compassion without surrender, support without sacrifice. The visit ended not with solutions, but with honesty. And as they left, she knew something fundamental had changed, not just in him, but in herself. After they left, the house was quiet again, but it wasn't the same kind of silence she had endured before. This time it felt settled, like a lake after a storm. She sat alone in her living room and reflected on everything that had happened: the demand, the distance, the return. For the first time, she didn't feel confused or torn. She felt clear. What she had done wasn't revenge in the way people usually imagine it. There was no cruelty, no celebration of her son's struggle. The real revenge, she realized, was choosing self-respect after a lifetime of self-denial. For years, she had believed that unconditional love meant unlimited access. She thought being a good mother required constant sacrifice, even when it drained her emotionally and financially. But through pain and solitude, she learned a harder, truer lesson. Love without boundaries doesn't heal, it enables. By standing firm, she hadn't stopped loving her son. She had simply stopped rescuing him from the consequences of his own choices. In the days that followed, her son reached out, not with demands, but with uncertainty. His messages were short, careful, almost humble. He asked for advice, not money. He asked how she was feeling. These small changes mattered more than grand apologies ever could. They showed growth, slow and fragile, but real. And she responded in kind, offering guidance and emotional support while holding her boundaries steady. She made it clear that help would look different now. It meant encouragement, resources, and accountability, not blank checks or emergency bailouts. If he wanted to rebuild his life, it would be through effort and responsibility, not inheritance spent early. This wasn't punishment. It was preparation for him and for her. What surprised her most was how peaceful she felt in maintaining those limits. There was no longer a knot of guilt in her chest when she said no. She understood now that her worth didn't come from being needed, but from being whole. Her life had meaning beyond motherhood, beyond sacrifice, beyond what she could give away. Slowly, their relationship began to change shape. Conversations became more honest, less performative. He listened more. She spoke more freely. They were no longer trapped in a cycle of expectation and disappointment. They were two adults learning, awkwardly but sincerely, how to relate with respect. She also stayed connected to the life she had built during the silence, the friends, the routines, the sense of independence she had fought to reclaim. She refused to shrink herself again, even for love, and in doing so, she modeled something powerful for her son: that strength isn't dominance or entitlement, but accountability and humility. In the end, the greatest lesson wasn't taught through punishment or loss, but through consistency. She had drawn a line and held it, calmly and without cruelty. Her son had been forced to confront a reality where love didn't mean control and family didn't mean ownership. And in that quiet victory, she found something far more valuable than revenge: peace, dignity, and a future shaped by choice rather than obligation.